David Amerland, I want to talk about this metaverse. And it's not the multiverse, which is a different conversation, but the metaverse, because it's a new name dropping term everywhere.
Yes, and and yes, and that's an important clarification, right? We're not talking about the multiverse, where infinite versions of us of ourselves are living infinite lives and getting it right in some of them, hopefully.
That's it. That's it. Yeah. So I'd like to start with your view of what is the metaverse, because Facebook is acting like they originated it when you listen to them. And there's a lot of versions of this that's been going on for a while, like Second Life and others.
That's right. Okay. I mean, strictly speaking, the metaverse as we think of it hasn't arrived just yet. Okay. And what is it? In essence, it's real 3D digital fixed points which have an existence in the digital realm and in some cases represent parts of the real world. So essentially, if we think of the metaverse, we think of it as an alternative digital reality which exists even when we're not logged in. And things there are fixed. So if you have a house, let's put it this way, a digital house in the metaverse, that house is still there when you leave, okay? Just because you logged off, it doesn't disappear. And when you go back, it is still there. And if there are processes within that house, perhaps, I don't know, you may have clocks running, you may have TV shows running, those things happen even when you're not there. So that's the metaverse. Essentially, it's a digital life. What we must stress, first of all, it's 3D. Second, it's fixed. Third, it doesn't exist as we understand it just yet, but we're beginning to go towards it. Does it have real world applications? Well, definitely. We've seen that in Second Life. Okay, Second Life launched an alternative economy where entire teams of people across the world would labor day and night to create weapons, clothes, even characters, which could be bought, some of them on eBay, and taken into the digital realm. So if you want a weapon, you had two choices. You could say, well, I can do all these quests, I can gather all the points and gather all the artifacts and fashion it, or I can buy it. So somebody had already fashioned it, and they said, this weapon costs X amount of dollars. So we're talking about a digital, ones and zeros, which only have an existence in Second Life, and they had actual value for somebody who was willing to pay for them. So it spawned an entire economy, and that gives us an idea of the value of the metaverse. In Second Life, some brands actually set up shops where you could buy branded clothes or branded gear for your character. And although they were dealing in tokens, they're dealing in digital currency at the time, which had existence only in Second Life, it helped brands create brand awareness. It helped them actually gain people's attention. And at the end of the day, attention is what gets you customers and converts.
Yeah, so, and I remember the first time getting on it. I was actually teaching a course, and someone asked about it years ago, and I realized I don't know what it is. And then I got onto it, and I have to tell you, I went to it's like being in a video game.
Yes.
And I checked it out before our presentation. They've really upgraded the resolution. Oh my gosh. It is to me one of the more cutting edge resolution features. But I remember teleporting to this one universe, and there was a sign as you go in that said, you must leave your clothes on. And I thought, what are they doing elsewhere? So they all aspects of life apparently were there, but it was a requirement of that universe. It was to me one of the cutting edge of this type of metaverse experience that is clearly upgraded since then and still there. In fact, they're putting out things like, Facebook's saying this, but we've been around for a while. We're still here.
Yes, exactly. And I think you made a very important point. He said, all aspects of life are still there. Okay, so we think of the metaverse as a 3D digital representation of the real world. In some ways, perhaps we'll see different structures there and different constructs which we can't yet adequately imagine. But at the end of the day, it's human behavior that drives this, which means human motivation, human needs, human desires, human wants. The human need for socialization is still in effect. So essentially, we are the ones driving it. And if anything, what changes when we go from the real world to any kind of digital construct, even this, is the fact that we are here by choice. In the real world, you can argue, if I meet you in the street and you say, hi, David, and I say, hi, Martin, because of being polite, we didn't have a choice. You were going somewhere, I was going somewhere, we passed each other and we said hi. But in the digital realm, we both made a decision to come here and do this. So basically, what does that mean? We have a specific motivation to do it, which means we have a specific intent, which means both of us have an agenda. And that changes the entire gamut of human behavior, because now everything is intentional, really. Everything has some kind of intent, some kind of aim, some kind of goal, which changes the entire dynamic. Why does it change it? Because now we really have to understand what is motivation, what is identity, what are the sort of the drivers of human behavior. If you talk about ethics, for instance, how does it manifest itself in the digital realm, where you can argue that any kind of unethical act, like the destruction of something digital, is not real. So, these are things which now we have to really grapple with and get down to the nitty-gritty and actually understand it. Why do we do certain things? And this makes it very interesting when it comes to something as prosaic as selling and buying stuff. Where you say, I have a need and you have something which I need. So why don't we, sort of enter into a relational exchange? And then we have to find a way to trust each other. I have to have some way of ascertaining how trustworthy you are. You have to have some way of ascertaining how credible I am, so we can enter into the kind of transaction. And now we are breaking all these things down. And in the past, we didn't have to. There were constructs around us that sort of kind of acted as ultimate authorities, or as a sort of guarantors, if you like, of our behavior. And we thought, okay, we weren't going to misbehave very much because these things were around in the real world. In the digital realm now, everything has to be constructed. It has to, in our minds, be deconstructed and understood and applied.
Yeah. And one of the things you brought up in an article you wrote about the metaverse world is the experience you had of going into an event and walking up and hearing the volume improve, and the experience that you could leave one room and go into another. And I thought that was the best picture for someone who's not experienced it, because in these worlds, when you get closer to something, then you hear things clear. And when you're further away, you hear them less. So imagine a virtual conference where you go into an event and you take a seat and then you can hear it clearly in the room, but you decide, I want to leave, you leave there. And that's something you brought up. Your article, I think, is important for us to build the picture of. It does give a richer experience than Hollywood squares like you have on Zoom. And the negatives of that, so many eyeballs watching you.
That's right, yes. Now, one of the things which we find very difficult to do is multitask, or even worse, we find it difficult to constantly chunk and sort of divert our attention. So if I see 10 faces in front of me, for instance, I'm beginning to struggle because I'm trying to connect with 10 people at once. And at the same time, I'm watching 10 pairs of eyes watching me back, which is quite daunting. We get into that conference, which I went to, and I had a Q&A there, and it was in Gathertown. And essentially, it's a 2D representation of our conference place, a conference hall, if you like, with different speakers rooms and different rooms and a bar and then a recreation area. It's really quite fascinating. You get a character which you deck out and you walk a character through, and it acts like a real person, right? If you approach somebody, you can introduce yourself, you can use the mic, and you have one-to-one. You need a group around you for them to hear you. If you move away from the group, the sound begins to fade, as you would expect in the real world. Now, what is fascinating is that because of that setup, I had the opportunity to basically funnel my attention. So when I was talking to the group, I had a group of about, I think, 10 to 15 people asking questions. They asked one at a time, and I was able to funnel my attention to each person in turn, which made it less tiring for me, certainly because it became a lot more enjoyable. It made it a lot less daunting. The setup itself, because you're looking at your character as opposed to looking at a face looking back at you, also made it a more intimate setting. So people were a lot more forthcoming. I didn't know anybody at that conference. Some of them had quite a high level of technical background, so their questions were quite involved, and some didn't. They came from sales and they had sort of more run-of-the-mill questions. Still interesting, but certainly not very technically taxing. And yet, at the same time, it didn't feel like it was a lot of hard work. We explored things in a very soft fashion, which actually fascinated me. And people were able to sort of come up with questions without sort of feeling feeling the need to be prompted. Whereas in a Zoom call, you prompt somebody, and then suddenly the person who hasn't said anything is aware that he hasn't said anything. Everybody's looking at him or her, and it becomes difficult. But there it didn't. It was very sort of casual. It felt like very, almost like around the water cooler. We discussed the setting itself, and the fact that you're looking at the avatars, the digital representations of people, kind of dials down the sort of the focus on the person itself, and that becomes a little bit easier to interact with strangers, or at least that's what I found.
Yeah, I think that's so important because you aren't going, you don't have your mic on. You can see they're talking, you don't have the mic on. And the other thing is the phenomenon of fatigue that we get as Homo sapiens with all these faces looking at us. And I, and then the other thing is when I'm training and I'm doing a webinar and I can't see anyone, that's also tiring for me. So I'm kind of excited about giving a training. Maybe, if someone's a frog and an avatar, it will feel more like at least I'm talking to something, in a representation than that feeling in webinars are very fatiguing because I'm a trainer that wants to engage, and I feel like you're the same way. You aren't there just to spew data. You're listening. It's kind of like I call it a Ravi Shankar concert, where the audience makes the music and back and forth. I have a great audience. I'm a different speaker. And I don't get that experience in the Zoom world like I do in person. So I see the potential in this metaverse of offering that we don't get in this Hollywood Squares or the webinar, where I feel like people are sending me notes, hiding underneath. I don't know if they're doing their laundry and ignoring me or what. And it's to me much more draining than being in person. And this might bring some of that back to us. So I'm excited to offer training. And that's why when I read your article of the experience, I went, wow, maybe we can have a virtual experience to reach more people that uses kind of a virtual meeting, this type of metaverse type world.
Definitely. It definitely tones it down. It makes it more game-like, so it makes it lighter. But it's that ability to funnel attention and also to dial it back, which makes it so much more enjoyable. And I understand totally what you're saying about if you have a lot of faces, it's draining because you're working with all of them at once. If you don't have anybody, it's equally draining because now you're trying to imagine your audience and you're really straining for feedback from perhaps sounds or comments or whatever, whatever you're getting. So it's really a lot of hard work. It's really tiring. But in that setting, in GatherTown, it wasn't because, I was moving my avatar left, right, etc. because, you can move it around chairs. You have to, you hit on obstacles. You can't, if you come up against a person, you have to go around them. So, it was quite fascinating. And then somebody said, I was at the bar, but nobody was serving, which is quite funny because there was a bar, but there was no barman. So, we talked about these things and it sort of lightened the tone. And it was really productive. That's what I really liked about it. The questions were absolutely amazing. We discussed them at length. We went to some sort of depth in some subjects, which I hadn't expected. And then even the people who had a non-technical background came with questions that were pertinent to them, even though we were discussing technical things. And I think, again, what I took away from that is that they were able to themselves dial it down, filter it, find out what was applicable to them, and come back really quickly, which I have never seen done on a Zoom call. Okay, people who come from different backgrounds, if they don't feel competent, they don't say anything. They just sit there.
Right. They're like, I don't want to open my mouth, and all these faces evaluate me as stupid.
Exactly. This is the judgment.
That is such a human condition. No, none of us go, hey, I'd like to embarrass myself today. Though I do try to do it to keep myself humble on a regular basis. Most don't wake up like that. I think that's a real important point. Another thing that happened on this, because I knew we were doing this show, is I'm a fan of one of the experts on cryptocurrency, Andre, and I got a little message. I'm in his Patreon group. There's a Christmas party going on. Click here. So I did, and then it opened up a web-based virtual world, not real high resolution, but I went down the hall and then they were there. And and the person who's this expert on the topic goes, I chose to use my real name. He goes, "Hey Martin, welcome to the party." And then I started interacting. Now, it took a little while because, like you said, you bump into furniture and you don't know you've bumped in. So it is a learning curve to realize that they're allowing some fundamental laws of physics to exist here.
Yes, definitely.
But it was really, I remember it as an enjoyable experience. And if I had more time, I would have stayed. I talked to someone and I said, I want to learn the Lightning Network. I want to send some coins to it. And they go, "Oh, I'll help you with that." And then they moved over towards me. Now, they were an avatar of a robot or something, and someone else was an avatar of a Lego creature. But it was amazing how quickly that dissolved away. I only had a few minutes in this world, and I had an experience of being part of something that I don't remember in a Zoom event.
Yes.
Or, and that's the thing I thought the goal to offer. This could give us a sense of connection in a world where we may have times where we have to isolate again or not isolate. Or, for example, you and I are in different continents right now, So if we could say, "Hey, I'll meet you at the bar to talk,"
Yes, exactly.
we could click in and go there and meet at 4 o'clock and chat.
Yes, and that's brilliant. And I think you're giving some brilliant examples. You're absolutely right. Now, in psychology, there's something called the audience effect. And essentially, when we see people looking at us, we imagine those people judging us, which means we become conscious of our behavior, and we change that behavior in accordance to what we think they think we are.
Right.
So it becomes quite complicated. So essentially, the moment we have this kind of staring back, especially amongst strangers, people you never really met before, or even worse, we know some people whom and they happen to be experts in their field, which is quite daunting. And then you don't want to sort of say something stupid because everybody will judge you. So we remove that. Let's take away the eyeballs. Let's take away the human faces, and let's have a Lego creatures. Okay, in Gather Town, we all had human avatars, and it's a little bit like Super Mario Brothers in the 90s kind of resolution. So it's quite fun. Right. And you walk around and you have your little baseball cap with sort of 3 or 4, whatever you had on it. Right. And people say, "Oh, it's interesting you chose that one." Right. You think, well, whatever it is, right? You talk about it, but there's no eyeball, there's no judgment, so what happens? It's what you said. The connection is a lot more immediate, it's a lot more fun. It feels a lot more human, even though the whole setup is quite the opposite, right? It's quite dehumanizing. You have digital avatars instead of people moving around, using the keyboard because, they're being moved around by the keyboard. But that takes away that daunting judgment which you feel other people are making of you all the time. And also it stops you from making judgment because you can't see faces, you can't see clothes, you can't see anything except the avatars. So it's quite fascinating, and the connection is very real. I think, the point you're making is really valuable.
Yeah, because who would have thought if you said, "Hey, Martin, you're going to go to a party and the person inviting you is a Lego person, and there'll be a dinosaur and a robot and something else there, and you're going to have a sense of you had an event and experienced something with." I'd go, "You're nuts." I'm not a gamer or anything else, and it was it. And then people would walk away or come back in, or someone put on the music, and the guy in charge goes, "Could you turn the music down a little bit?" And then the music went down. I don't know who it was, but someone else was controlling it.
Yeah,
so it's
fascinating,
isn't it? Piece of this, and another piece of it is the idea of the augmented reality we have and virtual reality. And I have the first generation I thought I'd bring on for us. So
wow, you have Oculus.
So this isn't the new one. I'm really waiting for Ocular 3 because I like one. My wife is smaller frame and she doesn't get out as much, and I like her to have experience, and this is too heavy for her, But this is the first generation. And someone in my social media management class, his first name's Frank, said, "I'm sitting in a ski resort working on a monitor with a keyboard and I've got two monitors. And even though it's not high resolution, it's really neat. And he's a tiny home minimalist. He's not a, how can I get the latest toys on the market? And he was excited about it. And he showed us some of it as well.
Yep. Okay, let's bring up the two things you said then and give them a little bit of a definition.
Yeah.
Augmented reality essentially is the real world with a digital layer applied onto it. So, if we have, if we look at the real world around us and we filter it through a digital layer, what are we doing? We're essentially applying a layer of additional information. So, the classic example on this is Google Lens, I think, where, you point it at things and, it tells you what they are. And Google also has in its navigation augmented reality in some countries. I don't know if it's worldwide now, but essentially, you set up your navigation. It tells you, do be careful if you're going to cross the street. The cars are there and you're not going to notice them. But what you're doing is you're looking around, and as you navigate, it tells you go left, go right, go, etc. And it also gives you the names of the buildings, and it gives you a better sense of what's around you through your phone. So using your phone as the digital layer to the real world. Now that's augmented reality. Virtual reality is the digital world made to look like the real world. So it's basically a digital domain with a very similitude of the real world. So you get in there, you see streets, and you see trees, and you see creatures, and have laws which mirror the laws of physics because they're consistent and they determine their behavior. So essentially, these two realms now, if we put them together, we get a sense of the metaverse. And the metaverse essentially, and the word meta essentially is something about something. So if we talk about meta, it's if we talk about the metadata on the website, what is it? It's essentially the layer of information which we put there, which describes the essence of the website for machines. It's invisible. Okay, machines will see it. So that's metadata. We talk about the metaverse. That's what it is. It's essentially a complex digital layer which does more than the real world upon which it is modeled. So that's how we should think about it.
And Pokemon Go to me was a tipping point for augmented reality. It was a game that exploded all over the world, and you went around and I'd be at the park, and people would be walking around with a phone and a giant battery pack to keep playing at my local park.
Yes.
And I looked through it and I went, oh, there's something over there. And they'd go, yeah, I know, I'm getting that. And so it was a geotagged augmented reality. And I think part of this, David, is some of these versions came out and it wasn't the right time yet. I think it's just like the Google first Lens or then Google Glass, and we weren't ready for it yet. Now we've been in isolation. We've been working out of Zoom. Maybe it's the tipping point where humanity's ready to pick it up. Sometimes technology comes out and it's just too ahead of its time. Like I was just watching a video on the handspring and Palm, and it really was a little too ahead of its time in some ways. But then iPhone dropped in perfect at the right time to have this mobile phone. So it could be we're at a tipping point with this, where humanity is going, I'm ready to try it.
It could be. Always in terms of the uptake of technology, because we always have early adopters, regardless of what it is, right? But in order for something to become mainstream, we need two things, in my opinion. And what are those two things? Well, the first thing is a low entry threshold. So it can't be something which needs a lot of technical know-how. It can be something which is super expensive. It can be something which needs a lot of tinkering, and it has to be reliable. Now, the second thing which we need is some kind of practical applicability. Because in order for lots and lots and lots of people to adopt something, they need to feel that they're gaining something. Case in point, the internet, right? Before the web came along, the internet was there for technical people because you had to know some kind of programming in order to get all the data that you needed out of it. It was there, but it was there for those who had the technical know-how, the computers, the access points, etc. The web comes along, and suddenly the internet becomes very accessible because the web is point and click. So it becomes really easy to use. It's very visual, so then we can all understand what we're doing, even if you don't know how to code. And that's what made the massive explosion of what we call the internet, which is essentially the web, go global and change everything. So in order for the metaverse now to have this kind of practical application, we need to find out, what do you gain if you're in it, apart from, making connections, or, is there a way to make a livelihood? Is there a way to promote your business? Is there a way to find out information which is perhaps better or faster or more accurate than what you would do in any other kind of format? And the answer to all of these things is yes. These things in principle exist. In principle, they're going to be there. So if we let's say something which, a small business environment, you say somebody's selling perhaps, it's your sort of regular neighborhood shoe store, and they have a presence there. And that presence there essentially allows people to try brands, come into contact with the people running the shoe store without feeling that I'm going to go in there, I'm going to try these things, I'm not going to, they're going to be too expensive, I'm not going to fit, they won't have what I have, it's going to be a bad experience, and I haven't got a lot of time. But if you're there anyway, if you're in the digital realm, then you've got nothing to lose. So you can create a kind of contact. And then from there, you can take it into the real world, right? And actually buy a real pair of shoes. Mm-hmm. So there is that. And the caveat to all this, of course, is the cost, right? So the cost usually is time. If you have any kind of real world presence and you're doing a digital sort of a layer to your business, whether it's social media, whether you have a website, whether you have a website and social media accounts, you need to invest time. And if you're investing time and putting in effort, you're doing it so you can reach an audience. In order to reach an audience and have their attention, which then you can monetize or take advantage of and use for what you have in mind, you need to be able to deliver value. So you need to be able to understand them. If you understand them, then you run your business better. So there's a huge payoff to this investment in time. And it's going to be inevitable in many ways. There are very relatively few shops, few businesses now that don't have some kind of digital presence. In time, there are going to be relatively very, very few businesses which will not have a presence in the metaverse as it's going to sort of develop.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's really important. And I think the key I experienced is a positive experience that was more enjoyable and fulfilling than just a Zoom meeting. And yes, that was to me, and that's what drew my attention, said we got to go do a show on it. And like you said, though, it still takes a little bit. You got to figure out what your avatar is. You got to go in, and then like me, I would teleported to, there was a hallway. So I'm going, well, is there no one here? And then I see something down the hallway. Well, somehow it dropped me in to the beginning hallway and finding it. So I think it's true that old adopter, and we've got an awful lot of people that grew up in video games. So they may take to it a lot faster than people in my age group understanding it. But, I'll tell people, give a grandmother a new way to connect to her grandkids and she'll learn quantum mechanics if it's required to make the connection. So don't assume that because they're older, they won't figure it out. And that's what I've learned over this experience. There's enough motivation, they'll do it. So I think it's an important piece.
Yes, I think you hit the nail on the head, basically. It's about motivation. If you can figure out what you think you're going to gain, then you'll be able to do whatever it takes in order to actually take advantage of it. If you think that you have nothing to gain from that, people say, I don't need a website, I'm only selling things locally, for instance. If you're actually convinced about that, you'll never, ever try to set up a website, try to test it, because you're not motivated enough, because you convinced yourself that there's no value in it. So it really comes down to, in many ways, understanding what you do and how you can use the digital format to actually reduce some of your workload or reach a broader audience or do some of the things that you do better and actually reach the people which you were hoping to reach locally.
The next thing I want to talk a little bit about is the connection to decentralization, Bitcoin, blockchain, and the metaverse, because there's an interesting site and it's called Decentraland. I think I got that correct. And I did get on as a guest to look at it before the show, and there are people buying up property on it, virtual property already. And it has its own crypto meta I made is a token it has. I I don't know if it runs on, I think the whole thing runs on Ethereum blockchain system. And I did experience it. It was pretty interesting. It was, not as high res as Second Life was, because that's the one I found the highest resolution of all my experiences. But this is emerging of this decentralized world in a Web 3.0. I'd like to talk a little bit about it, because that's, is Zuckerberg smart? He's going to find a way to dovetail these things, not exclude himself, but we'll see.
Yes. Okay. I mean, on the subject of Zuckerberg and Facebook, which is still called Facebook, and Meta, which is the company that now owns Facebook, there are a lot of questions there, because pretty much like Google and like Amazon, they've been found wanting in the way they did things. They haven't really lived up to our expectations. They haven't even lived up to their professed public conduct. So they've let themselves down, and this has become apparent and evident. So this is going to change. Right now in the world, if we're in the Web 2.0 really world, where essentially if we want to do anything, we have to use somebody's platform. And if we're using their platform, essentially in most cases, they're capturing the information of what we do. Sometimes they own the information we create outright. So, if you're on Facebook, if you put up any post, picture, etc., they own all rights forever until the death of the universe, kind of thing, right? So in some countries, they're trying to change that. I think in the European Union now they can request these things to be taken down because they're yours. But in other countries, they're not. Now we go into the Web 3.0 world, and the data is now generated and owned by the user. So it's us. And the way we do it is through decentralization, is through blockchain technology, which essentially creates a unique ID for everything which we do, essentially our own identity, so we can't be copied, and for a lot of the things which we create. So if I was to create, for instance, a digital statue of something, and that was based on blockchain technology, well, there's one unique version of that statue. And that gives a specific value because, usually in the digital realm, you can copy things ad infinitum, and that tends to reduce their value because there's no uniqueness. But if you create something unique and people want it, it does have a value. It also has what we call trustworthiness and credibility, because suddenly there's only that and you can actually check it. So this gives greater sense of veracity in some of the transactions, which creates the option of actually carrying out quite complex transactions with people you've never met before, because you trust the process, and the process can't actually be corrupted, or whatever it is they're selling can't be lost, etc. So you have greater trust, which goes into easier relational exchanges. The mind boggles where we can take this, because again, we're at the beginning of this, and if you want to take advantage of Ethereum or any kind of blockchain technology, there's still a lot of technicalities. It is not easy to do just yet, but so was the web in the beginning, right? If you wanted to create a website, you have to go and learn HTML. It's just crazy.
Yes.
Okay, and these days, you can, if you go to Wix, you point and click and create something out of a few pages which you've written up essentially, and it looks quite good. So we are at the beginning of this. The fact that we're talking about it means that we're interested, other people are interested, and also human behavior now on the web has a momentum in terms of how we have become accustomed to work remotely with each other, to carry out transactions with some in a faceless environment like Amazon and Google in certain services, and still trust the process. Because there are certain sort of standards and credibilities which are applied within that domain. You step outside these big corporations, and that trust doesn't exist so much. Well, this is what the Web 3 is trying to basically address. It says, if we could all trust each other, and there's a way to do this, then a lot of the things which we haven't dared to do, perhaps we can do. And that unlocks a lot of other things.
Yeah, and like you said, to get in Decentraland beyond just a guest, I've got to have what's called a MetaMask wallet going on. So I'm going to log in with cryptocurrency, and that's still at a pretty complex level. In fact, I
Yes.
was hoping to get it done by today, and I didn't. I have a MetaMask that I used in generating an NFT, so I learned the process, and then I knew it wouldn't sell, David, so I bought my own NFT. So now I've learned something about buying and selling an NFT and creating one.
Yes.
So non-fungible tokens is another, but this opens up the metaverse to an idea of a one centralized power doesn't have control over it. And I think more people will be attracted to it. Then the counter to this is, what about mischief? What about criminal activity? And what I say is there's been no new technology in humanity where criminals and good people didn't find a way to use it.
Yes.
It goes, hey, you aren't going to get anything if you look through history where they didn't find, okay, now we have the automobile. Can we get it moving fast enough to rob a bank? I guarantee that went through a criminal's hand, but right now there weren't roads or gas stations. So, but then once the criminals could use the automobile, they weren't going to use a horse and a buggy to rob a bank. They'd probably use the automobile. So we could act like automobiles encourage criminal activity. It's just going to happen. You need to understand they both work.
Yes. Yes. And I think, again, it's human behavior, right?
Yeah.
Wherever we go, we take with us who we are as a race, right?
Yes.
We can't separate that. So, we take the good and we take the bad along with it, and vice versa. So that's not going to go away. But what is happening increasingly, and I think this is encouraging, every layer of technology which we apply, I believe, reduces the level of inequality which we experience. It opens up opportunities where no opportunities existed before. And classic example, I think, Second Life, right? A lot of those people who were laboring to create the outfits and to create the weapons and sell them, etc. There were people in third world countries who wouldn't otherwise have had a job. And I know that, when you actually think how many computer contact hours they had to put in, it's ridiculous. They were almost like digital slaves. But on the flip side of that, if they didn't have that, they'd have nothing. Some of them would be living in the streets. Some of them would be being exploited in sort of, the equivalent of a muck job in their country, which is, pretty bad. And some of them would have to sort of resort to criminal activities because they have no other option. So I think with every layer of technology, we apply these things. With every layer of technology which we apply, which improves everybody's life, we also become a little bit more aware, a little bit smarter ourselves. So at some point we're saying, we don't want to encourage, this, or we don't encourage that. Or, we basically become better as a whole as we move forward. Okay, and historically, this is true. I mean, if you and I are transported in, the 10th century, Middle Ages, the possibilities of me and you strolling down the street, getting mugged and possibly killed are pretty high. Especially if we go, after 10 o'clock or after 9 o'clock when there's no light in the streets, and basically you have to carry your own torch. And maybe, if you're a person of means, you had your own armed guards guarding you. Okay, so, you and I can stroll down most streets of the world today at midnight, and we wouldn't get mugged and killed.
Right.
So I think,
yeah,
exactly. So this is an improvement, and I think we need to understand that historically things are getting better constantly, and part of this is this: we are rising, and as we're rising, we raise others around us with our activity, and then we owe it to ourselves to be aware of that effect. Okay, we can't put blinkers on and say, okay, I have my iPhone, or I have my, my sort of VR set, or whatever it is we have, and I'm fine, because it's not. We're part of a chain of events, we're chain of activities, and everything we do has an impact upon others.
Yes. So I guess the question is, if someone wants to dip their toe in this, the metaverse, I wonder where they would start. And I don't have an answer to it, but I thought, I don't know.
I can suggest a good experience. Good. I mean, go to gathertown.com, I think it's called.
Okay.
And basically just experiment with that environment, because it gives you a really good idea of what the metaverse will be like. Okay, bear in mind, this is, a very poor version of it. First of all, it's 2D on your screen. So, there's no 3D immersion like it should be. Secondly, you're using the keyboard to sort of navigate the environment. which is pretty basic again, right? Using the arrow keys. But it does give you a good representation of a commercial world, which has an existence outside yourself and always has that existence. And then the interaction happens there. So it's a good way to sort of, dip your toe in and say, that's what it will be like a little bit, only better. So how would I start in order to benefit from it? If you're learning, if you're networking, for instance, or, earlier on you mentioned about, carrying out a presentation. How much cooler would it be if you tell everybody, I'll meet you at the square of Gathertown, whatever it is that you set up. And you actually have a meeting in the open air, which is a digital environment, but it has an open air setting, right?
Right.
So I think,
that's a good one. We'll put the links, we'll get a series of links below.
Okay.
I also think if you're a mature adult, dropping into Second Life, download it and play with it.
Yes.
You might find someone who looks a little different or odd. I wouldn't guarantee, but I went in there, I landed on the pad, whatever it starts, and I walked over to the water and found out what would happen. And I went to the bottom of the water. And then I went, okay, how do I get out? And then I saw an arrow and it said fly. So I flew out of the water and I was flying. So I deliberately that's another one you could play with. And then of course, the Ocular, there's Ocular 2, I believe it is now. It is about $300 or $400, but that's within some means in a major country to be able to try out and experience. And obviously, Facebook's going to be racing to get something for people to see as soon as possible. Just know they're in control of everything.
Yes.
And then I do want to say in Decentraland, they have a nice where you can go in as a guest and set up and learn something about it before you have to set up your cryptocurrency and meta and everything else. So those are, I think, a few. And if we think of others, we'll put them in the description below, David. But
Brilliant.
The vote to me is I'm a little cynical of the behavior of the large companies now. I think that do no harm. They've gotten so big, it's hard to manage that. Well,
Google took the do no evil off their logo, off their motto some time ago. It's about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. They actually removed it. And there was a little bit of in the press, there was a little bit of a few questions about that. They said they're just updating for the modern age, etc. But, they don't abide by that anymore. Now, we need to understand something, right? The moment any large corporation achieves a particular status in terms of size and power and money, that corporation will serve itself. Because that's what it's there to actually do. It's unrealistic of us to think, hey, it's there to serve us. No, it isn't. It is there to serve itself. That's why it's actually set up. Now, when its founders were still at the helm, running it on a day-to-day basis, they bent it to their will. And it was Sergey Brin, who actually came up with a motto, do no evil. So he acted as a conscience of the company. Now, think about this, right? He was essentially the founder, and he had a sizable number of shares, battling the board, who was supposed to protect the shareholder value, so the company itself wouldn't do certain things. It wouldn't get it into defense contracts with the US military. It wouldn't get into China because of censorship. It had those things. Now, and Google does all those things now, right? So it does all those things. Its autonomous technology is being used in some of the military research for killer robots, essentially. So these are the things, but it makes sense for the corporation because it invested a huge amount of money into the technology, and now it needs to make money out of it. And that's perfectly fine. If we understand the limitations of each system ourselves, then we're less likely to be disappointed by its behavior. And also, it would allow us to better understand the limitations of that behavior so that we know, okay, how far should I trust this company? And you trust it up to that point. If you're happy with that company doing all those other things as well, because it also does the things which you like, that's great. That's for you to decide, right? So, these are the things which we need to keep in mind in a 21st century environment as people living in informed countries where we have access to information and can make mature decisions.
Well, I hope people have a better understanding of the metaverse. That's our goal of our conversation. And
Hope so, yeah.
you were entertained. And I invite people to add their comments below. And David, as we find more resources, I can always update them too. But
Brilliant.
I think this was a great introduction. What is this metaverse? And no, Zuckerberg doesn't just own the metaverse.
No, he doesn't.
This concept has been around for a while. He's just trying to come out and act like he owns it. But it will be their version too. And I like to hear if people found other ways to begin, resources, ideas, please add them too. We'll update it for someone who wants to learn what is this. I think it's an important thing to pay attention to. I think it's not going to go away. I think you hit the nail on the head when you had a different experience from like a Zoom meeting, and me too, in these new worlds. That there's something here that's a positive human experience over just a web meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Well, Dave, of course, mention your new book, and I'll put my links below as well. You have a new book that's out, and mention how they can learn about it, and look forward to hearing from people what they want to hear next from us.
Definitely. Okay, my latest book is Intentional: How to Live, Love, Work, and Play Meaningfully. We do need meaning in order to actually have purpose in our life. Purpose changes everything. The book is modular. You can, read any chapter you like in any sort of order. Do have a look at it if you can. It will actually help you be better in your life and in your business. And Martin, as always, this has been incredibly good. Thank you so much for all your questions here.
Yes, it's been a blast. So look forward to our next show. We'll be discussing what it is and hear from other people. Take care, David, and wish everyone else the very best.
Take care. Bye-bye.